Distractions by Prodigal. Before we start, the first preliminary cautions that we listed in the first video, Christians' Lies. Number one, this video and all the others that I produce are aimed primarily at adult Christians who call themselves, adult Americans who call themselves Christians. Number two, no artificial intelligence in this except what's on the internet, blah, blah, blah. Number three, I'm just gonna talk here. I've got some note cards made up of bullet points that I want to cover, but mainly I'm going to do a free stream of consciousness. You can see that primarily in Trump. What's Trump? He does stream of consciousness, but mostly with lies. I won't consciously lie to you here. I'm certain I'll probably get some things wrong, but I will not consciously lie to you, and I will document or give you sources that you can check anything that I say. I'm going to essentially follow a chronology here, beginning at the beginning. I won't have any kind of segmented videos anymore. I'm not going to deal with that. So, the beginning is Genesis for Christians. In the beginning God. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And that was the creation of a spiritual universe, not physical, spiritual. Because God is spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and truth. You know that. Adam and Eve and all the animals in the Garden of Eden were spiritual animals and plants, and the garden itself was spiritual in the kingdom of heaven. Now, science, the beginnings of science, you can see some pretty good videos on the internet. Stephen Meyer put out a good one that I just saw this morning, talking about scientific materialism, where there is a universe that's unguided, undirected, natural selection, and intelligence is not wanted. That's the way it is. But in the scientific literature, they talk about light. What is light? Because at the beginning, they call creation now the Big Bang. It wasn't an explosion, and they know that, but they do not want to call it the Great Light, which one unnamed physicist did call it years ago that I saw. So what is light? Is light a wave or is it a particle? In fact, they say it's both. So that means that the physical universe is already fallen. It's a distraction from the spiritual universe that God the Father created. Because there is no duality in the kingdom of heaven. There is no death. There is no giving in marriage, just as Christ said years ago. So, there was no duality until Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That is the tree of duality, which is now the physical universe in which we all live and move and have our being, blah, blah, blah. So, the universe itself is a distraction from God the Father and the kingdom of heaven and the tree of life that grows in the middle of the garden. We continue to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of duality. The tree of life and death. Which do you choose? Because that is the choice here and now, as it always has been and ever will be as long as there's a physical universe. So, which do you choose? Life or death? Now, the geologists and the cosmologists seem to say that the universe is about 14 and a half to 15 billion years old. That's the physical universe we're talking about now. And I saw a video online the other day, and the guy is saying he was going to defeat Christianity by saying, how old is the universe? And somebody says, 14, 15 billion years old. How do you know? Were you there? He better not ask me, and after this, he better not ask you, because I will tell him, yes, I was there, but I don't remember seeing you. I was there, as we all were. We were still composed probably of subatomic particles and maybe, I don't know, atoms. At the beginning, no, there were no atoms, but probably subatomic particles, and we evolved into atoms, and we all had to be there, you and me and everybody and everything, because of the law, the physical law of the conservation of matter and energy. Their energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed, at least in the physical. That's what I say. Transformations, yes. As Einstein's relativity tells us, as I understand, energy and matter are interchangeable at the speed of light squared. E equals mc squared. That's my understanding. Anyway, we were all there, and we're all here now, and we always will be. The physicists and the mathematicians say that math is the language of the universe. It's the language of God. And I would add to that, it was a language taught to you by YHWH. Now, they have pretty well... Oh, let me cover this first. They say the Earth is about 4.5 billion years, 4.5 to 5 billion years old. Okay. So the geologists have pretty well figured out how old the universe is. It goes far beyond Bishop Ussher's declaration years ago that the Earth was created at 6 p.m. on a weekday in 4004 BC. Now, the mathematicians have overruled that, but as a kind of joke, maybe they can figure out a question that has never been answered, to my satisfaction. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? that comes down to us from the Middle Ages. Now, there's a couple of good videos on YouTube that you can find. Stephen Meyer, I don't know much about him. I just saw his videos yesterday and this morning. And there's also a new video by a Dr. Michio Kaku, who talks about the Genesis project, which was a quantum computing project, I think at MIT. I have that starred, and I'm going to watch that again and again until I understand it. But it has to do with quantum computing, and he titled that video, or that video is titled at Spatialize. You can find it at YouTube. And the title goes something like, Michio Kaku says that this quantum computing project found something that we shouldn't really see or look at, because it talks about the Omega Code, which underlies everything we know of the physical universe. And there is a code beyond that, which I do not understand, which seems to be some sort of corrective code for the original software code that gave us the physical universe, which raises the possibility that we are in fact living in a simulation. There's a lot of speculation about that on the internet and YouTube. You can find if you're looking. But that intrigues me, because the reason that Dr. Kaku says it shouldn't be seen, in my opinion, is that these guys have pretty much proved the existence of a superintelligence that designed and built the universes, including ours. As I recall, Einstein theorized that there were some 26 dimensions from creation, and now they're talking about 16. I prefer 26 myself, because that, in Aramaic, that is the number of the name of YHWH, I am who I am. The name of God the Father that he gave to Moses at the burning bush. Okay, we come down to about 200,000 years ago, through all the various ages that have been described, the age of the dinosaurs and blah, 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 on down to about 400,000 years ago, I think, by Dr. Donald Johanson, Australopithecus afarensis in eastern Africa and Ethiopia, who is Lucy, is what he called her. Called her. She is our Homo sapiens direct ancestor, as far as seems to be right now. So, Homo sapiens, which is us, arose about 200,000 years ago in East Africa. Hunter-gatherers, black folks, hunter-gatherers, I say, moving around in tribes, hunting and gathering. And one thing I saw on a video on the internet of a surviving hunter-gatherer tribe in Africa, their primary concern was meat and honey. That's what they really want. You know, they'd eat tubers and plants and seeds and fruit and all of that, but their primary concern was with meat and honey. So I've started eating more meat and adding honey to my meat when I eat. Okay. Anywhere from 70,000 years ago to 50,000 years ago, I've seen 70,000, 60,000, 50,000 on the internet. These hunter-gatherers, black Africans, began to move out of Africa and to take over all the other hominid species that existed. In South Africa, they took over from the Naledi. In Europe and Eastern Europe, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, they took over from the Neanderthals, and from the far eastern peoples, they took over from the Denisovans. That's what they're called. And there was some sort of midget tribe, I don't recall what they were called, in, I think, Indonesia, some of the islands out there. But Homo sapiens migrated out of eastern Africa into the rest of the world and displaced every other hominid species on the planet. That's my understanding, all the way down into the blackfellas in Australia, China, Europe, Russia, everywhere. So, we are all black. We are all descended from a black African woman called mitochondrial Eve, because the genetic markers in her DNA are in our DNA. That's what I got out of all of this. We are all originally black African Gentiles. And everybody, every group of people, every tribe, every nation, everybody, Homo sapiens, is descended from black Africans. Take it or leave it. So, we are all black monkeys. Now you can see, you can take a look at Christians' lies. There's a little piece on that. Because the Pharisees and the Judeo-Pharisees say that monkeys, black African people, people with dark skins, are monkeys, macacos, they call them monkeys. There's some interesting videos online too, written or produced by a gentleman named Coromeo Ahau, I think I pronounced that right, a Costa Rican who has done some literary researches on modern black people. And it looks like that royalty in Europe, the elites in North America, all were black. He lists one that I recall specifically from some older book published back in the 1800s, where Lincoln himself admitted that he was darker than any black man. Does that compute? And I suspect that Alexander Hamilton, that little Jewish peddler, Jefferson called him, from the Caribbean, was black. And I suspect that Jefferson himself was a black, light black skin with red hair, like, say, Malcolm X. Malcolm X was called red because of his red hair, reddish hair. So, we are all black, and anything else outside of that, religion, law, racism because of skin color, politics, education, blah, blah, blah. Everything is ideology. It's all human invented, conditioned, educated belief systems. We learn that racism And skin color, it seems, is evolutionary. For those Homo sapiens who moved into the upper latitudes, say up in Scandinavia, the Scandinavian country, northern England, maybe up in those areas, their skin began to lighten in order for the ultraviolet light from the sun to make more vitamin D in their skin. That's where vitamin D originally comes from, us, in our skin. You know, it occurs out in nature as well, but in us. And vitamin C, or D, excuse me, is vital in the production of strong bones and a strong immune system. And I even saw some suggestions that is the reason why immunity is the reason why Homo sapiens replaced all these other hominid species. Because when they came out of Africa, they had strong immunity against diseases that were prevalent in East Africa, excuse me. So they had a immune advantage over other species out there. Food for thought. Okay, civilization. Civilization started, 10, 12, 14,000 years ago. 10 to 12,000 BC, after the Younger Dryas. After the last ice agelet, I guess you could say. It didn't last but about 1,500, 2,000 years from what I read. And the hunter-gatherers began to settle down and cultivate. They became farmers as well as hunter-gatherers. But the family, clan, and tribe developed, and later on rulers and their flunkies, peasants, slaves, and so on. And that's very early on. Writing's not very old. Everything up to about 3000 BC was oral. But writing developed cuneiform in Sumer, the Sumerians, cuneiform, the hieroglyphs from the Egyptians, and then about 1400 BC, according to Sanford Holst, who is the authority on things Phoenician, the Phoenician alphabet is the basis of most, if not all, modern Western alphabets. 1400 BC. The Phoenicians, you ought to read Holst's books on the Phoenicians. Very interesting people. Master mariners, wonderful shipbuilders. Buy his book just to look at the picture in the back about how they built their ships out of the cedars of Lebanon, the mountains to the east of Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon. They came originally from the island of Santorini, but before that blew up for the first time back in prehistory, they migrated out of there. They fled that country, that island, and moved into Byblos, Sidon, and later Tyre. But look at those people. They were master mariners, traders of the first premier fleet. They were master shipbuilders and stonemasons. They invented all kinds of things. They worked in glass, and they invented Tyrian purple, which became the color, rare color of the Roman, probably, and Grecian elites, Roman especially. I can remember that. And they would still be around today, probably. They probably still are around. Well, they were in Carthage. Carthage was a rogue, kind of a rogue Phoenician town. They wanted to become like all the other people, the people who left Tyre and Sidon and moved to Carthage. Well, they became like everybody else when they got their ass kicked by the Romans, and their land supposedly salted up so that nothing will ever grow there again. But the Phoenicians were defeated by Alexander the Great Dumbass in about 325 BC. And some of those people fled Tyre and Sidon. Sidon and all those Phoenician towns were built on the coast, and typically in areas that could be easily defended or left. Tyre was built on a small island with protected bays, which the Phoenicians loved. And it took the dumbasses, folks, about 2 years to build a jetty out to the island from the mainland, which gave the Phoenicians plenty of time to leave, because the Phoenicians had no army. They were an admirable people. A communal society. Everybody worked for the good of the society and earned according to their production. There were no kings. The leaders were chosen from the master captains who provided the greatest profit to the community. The most successful captain was typically the leader of the Phoenician people. No army. They typically bribed their attackers, and their attackers bought into it, all except the dumbass. So he got his comeuppance, so that sucker. There was a good program from a national TV years ago that I saw on how Alexander died. Alexander was a homosexual, though he did marry some women, but he never had any children on him because he was homosexual, and he was mourning. This video started out with him mourning the death of his lover about 8 months before, and he forced his doctors, he forced his doctors to kill him, because at that time they used white hellebore, which is a poison. It's an emetic and a cathartic, which means that you puke and shit forcefully while on it. And he made his doctors keep giving it to him when they didn't want to give it to him. And he puked and shat himself to death. The dumbass part comes in because he was not a typical monarch. He had no heirs. So they broke up his kingdom into his three top generals. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids up in the eastern Mediterranean, and the other one I don't remember. But he was a dumbass. He wanted to conquer the world. He went into India and got his ass kicked there, and his people, his soldiers, finally threatened mutiny if they didn't get to go home, because they'd been away from home for years fighting his wars for him. And Alexandria was the end of him, which is just as well. Anybody that dumb. Okay, so we come down to 1400 BC in the Phoenician alphabet, which is the ancestor of most, if not all, Western, Middle Eastern alphabets. Aramaic and ancient Hebrew came out of Phoenician about 800 BC, according to what you read. Which is just as well, because in 722 BC, the Assyrians defeated the kingdom of Israel and hauled off a bunch of people. Originally I thought they hauled them all off. But I have read recently of archaeological data which suggests that they only took about 45,000 or so. Anyway, and they moved in the people who became the Samaritans, which is why the Samaritans were denigrated and despised by Judeans and Benjaminites in Judea in Greek. There was no Judea in them times. It was Judea, Palestina. There was no J or J sound, as I explained in Christians' Lives, until about 1640. And they were called, the Israelites were known as YHWHs, from the Aramaic name of God, YHWH, which is Y-E-W-E, or I-E-W-E, as I showed from the 1611 King James Version Bible and Christians' Lives. YHWHs. That's where the word Jew comes from, because in 1611 that Yahweh became Yui. And as I explained in that video, the first use of the word Jew was 1775 in a London stage play by Sheridan. You can look that up. That's where I got it, looking it up. Okay, so the remnant of Israel begins there, I suspect, even though there is a mention of remnants in earlier prophets, Isaiah, as I recall. And Jesus, Yeshua, came to save the remnant of Israel. He did not travel much in Judea. He stayed in Israel, outside the boundaries of Judea. And the only time he went into Jerusalem essentially was Passover. And went into the temple and taught in the temple. So, on with the show. Around 586 BC, I've seen dates ranging all the way up into 593, 592, 590, 587 BC. Babylonian exile. The Babylonians swooped in and carted off 40,000, supposedly 40-some thousand, of the elite Judeans. And they were freed about 60 years later, so sometime around 523 BC, by Cyrus the Great, a Persian, Iranian today, believe it or not. And that was the beginning, Babylon was the beginning of the Pharisee cult, which owns us today. And Trump is a Pharisee. Musk is. Peter Thiel. Sugar Baby. Zuckerberg. A lot of those tech bros, those billionaire tech bros, are Pharisee. But the 40,000 came back, led by Ezra the prophet. And you can look at the rise of the Babylonian Talmud Torah in Christians' Lies in that video. It's there. So, the Talmud Torah, as Jesus, it was called the traditions of the elders in Jesus' time, Yeshua's time, and he condemned it as the rules of men nullifying the laws of God, and later told the Pharisees to their faces, "You are children of your father the devil." Pharisees then and now are Satan worshippers. That is what the universe became at the fall. And so we are all owned and operated by Pharisees, Satan worshippers. Take it or leave it. That's covered pretty well in Christians' Lies. Okay, I'm going to move pretty quickly through Christ's life here on earth because it's all covered in the New Testament. The New Covenant in my blood, as Christ himself called it, the Last Supper. I'll make a few exceptions. You ought to look up scourging by the Romans, how it was done and what it did to people. Because Christ was scourged by Pilate at his trial. And Pilate wanted to release him because I can find no guilt in him. And then the voice from the crowd calls out, "If you do not crucify him, you are no friend of Caesar's." And Pilate immediately surrendered. Look it up in Christians' Lies. It's there. It's there. Also, look at how brutal crucifixion was to the Romans. How it was done, the mechanics of it. Look at it close. The nails through the wrist bones, not the hands, through the wrist bones, because if you nail a guy to the cross through his hands, the weight of his body on his hands is just going to pull out the flesh, and the nails will still be there, and he'll be hanging by his ankles. Find that picture on the internet that shows the remains of a calcaneus with the spike driven sideways through the calcaneus into the wood of the cross. And the guy is hanging there by the side of his feet. Look at that. Think about it, how them guys died. Some of them guys lived for 6 days up there, from what I read. Christ died fairly early. Agony is probably an understatement. Okay, then we look at Hebrews. If the Old Covenant had been enough, if the Old Testament had been enough, good enough, there would be no need for a new covenant. And at that time, covenants were sealed in blood. And that's what Yeshua meant by the new covenant in my blood, because he sealed the new covenant, the New Testament, with his own blood. So that is why the gospel is so important. The instruction that Yeshua gives to us to seek the kingdom of God within us. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything else will be added to you. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of God is within you. So that's where you look. You do not look to the outside, to anyone outside of Yeshua himself. Because Yeshua himself says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that's true. That is God's only truth. And you either follow Yeshua or you follow Satan. There is no other choice. Life or death. That is the choice. Remember that a choice, that a decision not to decide is still a decision. You must choose. And the only realistic choice is life. That's the only thing that makes sense. Okay. So, we see that modern Jews, in quotation marks, are not Semitic. They are Khazarian. And Khazaria is pretty much Ukraine nowadays. So you can see that the Russia-Ukraine war is a distraction. It's a distraction from God. Because the owners of Russia and Ukraine and the state of Israel and all the Western nations, as well as Canada, the U.S., they're all owned by what I call the owner's cartel, and we'll get into that deeper later on. I'm not going to get into it now. It just goes on and on and on. Every facet and aspect of life in this physical universe is owned and controlled by Satan worshippers, Pharisees and Judeo-Pharisees. So, the only way out is the way in, like I told you in Christian's Lies. Because anything else you do to publicly oppose these Satanists is going to bring down the wrath of Trump on you. And Trump has appropriated in his big beautiful bill something like $175 billion to fund his own private ICE army. That's what ICE is going to be. And you can sign up for it. There's a $50,000 signing bonus from what I read. And you're going to be trained in how to do it. Probably a basic training course and how to use guns and knives and sticks. You'll be learning how to pick up people and transport them to the camps that are to be built, to go into the guillotines that are being placed there, to behead Christians. Because Christians, everything Christian is idolatry under the Pharisee Noahide laws, which Trump has been chosen to bring in after he destroys the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which he is in the process of doing right now. And like I said, in Christians' lives, maggots, you're next. You think Trump is a Christian? He loves Christians for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like I told you. You're next. He doesn't like anybody but himself. And he takes orders from the same people that Putin and Zelensky and Netanyahu take. Trump was chosen by the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem this year in February to be Moshiach ben Yosef, or Messiah, son of Joseph, a preparatory Antichrist. He was chosen Prince of Peace by the Israel Heritage Foundation in February of 2024. You can find those online. Henry Macau, Macau.com, stateofthenation.info, a lot of information on the Tech Bros from Whitney Webb. She is very good at that. There's all sorts of information on, and we'll get into Trump. I want to talk about Trump's biography, his genealogy. There's a lot to say about Trump. The main thing to me right now is that he was trained by his father, supposedly, from what I've seen online, to be a king, in quotes, and a killer, in quotes. So we can see right now, since the global cartel owns some 56 central banks around the world, they control all the currencies. They control the American dollar, which is debt, and it's debt in every other country that I know anything about. So we're all indentured servants right now, slaves in perpetuity. So the entire global situation right now is one of distraction. Distract you from what is here now and coming. Israel and Gaza, distraction. Because it's distracting you from God. How can a good Christian buy into the genocide that is going on in Gaza right now, backed by Trump and Netanyahu, who was picked by that same Sanhedrin to be Moshiach ben David, or Messiah, son of David, another preparatory Antichrist. Okay, Epstein is a big distraction. That, I think, was the reason that Trump's doing all this traveling around, this Alaska trip with his buddy Putin. Because Trump has been a Russian asset for years. And Putin was KGB, lieutenant colonel in the KGB before he became, I think he was mayor of St. Petersburg. Anyway, Yeltsin picked him as director of the FSB, which is the modern KGB. So he's very highly connected. But he's listening to what the owners are telling him as well, because they put him there. And to go against the owners is to invite death, execution, a la Lincoln and Garfield and Kennedy. Look it up. Then the destruction of the West is a distraction too, to destroy the remnants of our Constitution and the Bill of Rights especially, and bring in the Great Reset. Old Satan Claus and his good buddy, Mrs. Harakiri, at the YHWH forum in Davos will tell you that. Look up old Satan Claus's genealogy. That'll tell you something about the owner cartel, especially the Frankfurt Combine, that owns most of the central banks around the world. One or two, three exceptions to that. The only three major countries around the world that do not have central banks are, number one, Iran. Surprise. Number two is Cuba, and North Korea is the third. Central banking is their means of control. Control the money, control the food, control the people. And that's what the modern world is all about. Wealth, power, control, influence, family, genealogy. And that's where Trump comes in. We'll talk more about Trump later on. But you can bet your boots that China is the future. The West is toast. China and the BRICS are the future. So now let's go back to chronology. That was a pretty good digression, to say the least. Okay, 325 AD, Constantine and the Council of Nicaea. He divided the Roman Empire right there, and he also helped to divide the early Christian church, because the Pope in Rome did not attend. He sent ambassadors, but he did not attend himself. The capital of the empire was moved from Rome to Constantinople, now Istanbul. So that was the first division of the church. Okay, then we can talk about the Talmud Torah. It was being written down somewhat in Yeshua's time, but it really got written down later, after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the dispersion of Pharisees around the world. But the Mishnah, or unalterable law, was written down and codified by the rabbis in around 200 AD. The Gemara, which is the commentaries, discussions, and arguments of rabbis, around 500 AD. That's the word I see. Then the 6th to the 8th century and later is the rise of Islam. And we'll talk about Islam later on in another. I don't know how I'm going to do that. We'll touch on Islam pretty deeply. And then the 8th to 10th century, we've got the Khazarian conversion. And you see this Christians' lies on that too. We talk about that a little bit there. 1054, the Great Schism, where the Roman Pope excommunicates the Eastern Patriarch. That is the Great Schism. The Roman Pope controls the Roman Catholic Church, and the Eastern Patriarch becomes kind of the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. 1066, the Norman conquest of Britain at the Battle of Hastings. Okay, the 12th through the 15th century. We can talk about the Crusades and the Knights Templar, where they had a group of 7 or 8 knights got together and organized the Templars, got the Pope's okay, and then the royal estates and money were donated to support the Templars' conquest of the Holy Land. And it wasn't long before the Templars became probably the wealthiest outfit on the planet, because these estates, which had been donated, provided a lot of bucks. And oh, look at Sanford Holt's books on the Templars. And the main thing I got in there in his books is that toward the end there were more civilian Templars working on the estates than there were warrior monks in the East. And around early 1400s, Philip the Fair of France and the Pope got together and decided to destroy the Templars, and did. They were captured, tortured, and supposedly confessed under torture to heresy and abominations. They were accused of being homosexuals with sodomistic rituals, etc., etc. And in 1413, on a Friday the 13th, I think it was in the fall, I don't know, look it up, de Molay and some of his associates were burned at the stake. And that was the end of the Templars. Unless you want to go look at the Priory of Zion and all that crap, and the Rosslyn Temple in Scotland and all that crap, which you can do if you want. Okay, during that same period, there was the rise of Freemasonry, Hermeticism, alchemy, magic, tarot, Rosicrucianism, etc., etc., etc. All kinds of garbage. All kinds of Satanist practices. And one thing we should cover too that went on during that time was the goldsmiths and their invention really of futures markets and index options. That's really interesting because at that time, goldsmiths owned the vaults and the safes where they kept their own gold in there, and people came to them and persuaded them, probably without too much effort, to store their gold, and the goldsmiths said okay and gave them receipts for the gold that they were handing over. Now these receipts began to trade as money, paper money. And the goldsmiths learned early on that only about 10% of people would come in for their gold at any particular time. So they began writing receipts on gold that did not exist, much like commodity futures today. And so it finally wound up there were about 10 times as much receipt money, I would call it, receipt currency, not money, than there was actual gold in the vaults. And any time there was some sort of emergency, maybe trashed crop season, bad crop season, weather emergencies around, and people were rushed in to get their gold, well, there wasn't any. Too bad. And so the goldsmiths upstaked and got the hell out of Dodge. right quick. But that is the forerunner, I'm convinced, of option markets today. All sorts, and you can see it now on the internet. Andy Schechtman talks about that a lot. There are a lot of videos with him talking about it. And the same thing is happening right now. There were about 10 to 12 times as much paper ounces of gold and silver than there are actual physical gold and silver. Same situation, same identical situation, seems to me. So what's going to happen? They're probably going to get paid off in currency. Force majeure, it's typically called. If you can't. And where's that going to come from? That's going to come from the Fed. And more bonds to the Fed, more interest payments, higher inflation, and we're right back again in the same situation right now that faced the states in 1929. Except this time they're going to call it the Greater Depression, because at that time we didn't really have derivatives, residential mortgage derivatives, commercial mortgage derivatives, all sorts of probably commodity derivatives I don't know about. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that, but what really interests me is that, and should you too, is that the derivatives, the last I heard, the derivatives debt is somewhere around, total worldwide is about 3 to 4 trillion, quadrillion, $2 and that can never be paid. But the holders of those derivatives have first call on any monies that show up at the banks. And you and me, we're going to get bailed in. Our deposits, which we think are ours, are not. We are unsecured creditors to the bank. That's by law and has been for probably a century or more. So we are creditors and our monies will be bailed in. And if the total thing, if our total deposits are bailed in, we will get stocks in that worthless bank. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. But anyway, that's about all I have for today. I reached a good stopping point because I regard the papal bull of 1450 as the beginning of the modern world. And we will talk about that next time. So stay tuned. One last word I'd like to say about these pictures that I'm putting up here of Yeshua. Those are my own iconic portraits, I call them. They are based on the Christ Sinai bust of Yeshua, which you can look up. But I changed it into more of a portrait, which is more pleasing to my eye. But these are mine. And I will show you a few more in later videos. But for now, may God bless us everyone. Goodbye.